Hello, everyone. My name is Sahara, and I want to welcome you all back to part 2 of our What's on the Ballot workshops. This program is focused on peer-to-peer learning so you can feel confident when voting in this upcoming election. Our presenters will be answering any questions submitted through the Q&A feature at the end of the presentation. We highly encourage you to submit any questions you may have as they arise. Leslie and Marvin are going to be leading this event tonight, and I'll let them go ahead and introduce themselves, and then we can go ahead and begin.
Can we go to the next slide? Alrighty, thank you. So yes, thank you, Sahara, for introducing us. So my name is Leslie Aguirre. I'm currently a senior in political science, and I am also the president of the Political Science Student Association. I'm also currently serving as a fellow for Ignite National, which is a nonprofit organization focusing on helping women run for office. And as far as my background in politics and activism, I have been involved since I was young, and I have been consistently involved in different aspects of political engagement, from campaigns to fundraising to community organizing. So yeah.
Hey, my name is Marvin Chaudhry, and I am a CSUN alumni. I am actually the former CSUN AS Chair of Elections, and I'm currently a research associate for the LA City Health Commission. And I have some political ties because I've worked on a couple of campaigns here in this district, but my main goal is to get an MD and to try and change healthcare to expand access so that more people have access to healthcare, basically. So the first step we want to kind of start with is finding your candidate information about them. So Sahara is going to be dropping a few links. The first link we're going to be using is votersedge.org/CA. And all you really need for this is your street address and a zip code, and it'll direct you to basically a sample ballot with candidate comparisons. And it's also helpful proposition, but we'll just be looking at the candidates for today. Next slide, please. So the first thing you want to do is go to votersedge.org/CA, and basically you're going to put in your address. Next slide, please. So I put in the CSUN address here. You just put in the street address and the zip code, and you press Find My Ballot. Next slide, please. And after you found your sample ballot, what you're going to do is you're going to go down to the race that you're interested in. So next slide, please. For this example, we're using the district attorney race, which is kind of a popular race here in Los Angeles County. And you're going to select the Compare Candidates feature down at the bottom right. Next slide. And once you do that, you can kind of see that there's like a general comparison, but once you click on Compare, it'll give you a more in-depth comparison that you can kind of look at and decide who you want to vote for. Next slide. So the other resource we're going to be showing today is Ballotpedia. And it's ballotpedia.org/sample_ballot_lookup. And again, Sahara will drop the links in the chat. And all you need for this is your street address, your city, and your state. And it'll direct you to a sample ballot with candidate information. And again, it's also for propositions, but we'll only be doing the candidates for today. Next slide, please. So again, you're going to be putting in your address into the sample ballot lookup for Ballotpedia. Next slide. And once you've clicked Select My Ballot, you can kind of see the elections that you can vote in. For us, it's going to be November 3rd. So click on the November 3rd election. Next slide. And scroll down to the race you're interested in again. And this time you can select one of the candidates. This one doesn't really have a comparison feature, but it highlights single candidates. Next slide, please. And once you've selected your candidate, you can kind of read up on them. And at the bottom of their little bar thing, it'll have a contact information sort of area where you can find their official website and other official links to their campaign resources in case you want to investigate for yourself on who to vote for. And essentially, this gives you a way to kind of compare candidates on your own and gather resources in a sort of non-biased format. Next slide.
Alrighty, thank you, Marvin, for explaining those resources. So who is on the ballot? Well, there's a lot more people on the ballot than just the presidency. And the presidency is that race that most people have their eyes on. However, there's so many candidates ranging from offices on a federal level, state level, and local offices that you will be voting for and that you will see on your ballot. And these races are equally as important as the presidency, if not more impactful to your immediate community, especially the ones that you're voting for on a state and local level. So understanding these roles and the different positions that they play in government is really important for you so that you can make an informed decision as to who can best serve in that role. And so most of these races vary according to where you live. So we are not going to go over any specific candidates. We are mainly going to focus on what exactly does blank do. So that way, when you go out and you look at your ballot and you see the names of the candidates, you know what is their job expectation, and you can go ahead and find out more on whether or not they're a good candidate to fulfill that role. Next slide, please. Okay, so starting off with the President of the United States. Of course, everyone knows what that is. However, sometimes there's a little bit misconceptions as to what exactly does the president do? And in political science, we have conversations surrounding the roles of the president, and constitutionally, there are very limited roles and powers for the president. So here we have listed some of them. So the first one that we have is appointing heads of federal agencies, including the cabinet. So this means, like, think of different departments, right? So the Department of Education, Department of Agriculture, the State Department, right? The president is responsible for appointing people to serve in those head positions. It's not mentioned here, but they're also responsible for appointing, or at least nominating, a Supreme Court justice. So their role as president is to nominate these people, which then get approved by the Senate and the House of Representatives. Next, they serve in the role as commander-in-chief. So the president is in charge of the country's armed forces. This means that the president is in all conversations on strategic military decisions. Next, and we'll talk about this a little bit more when we get into the congressional or the members of Congress and Senate. But when a bill comes to the president and the president agrees with that bill, he can sign that bill into federal law within the 10 days that it comes to his desk. However, if they oppose it, then they can veto it, which is called the power of the veto. And they return that bill to Congress, and Congress has to make changes addressing the issues that the president makes in their signing statement. Next, the presidency has clemency and pardoning powers. A pardon is an official forgiveness for an acknowledged crime. Once a pardon is issued, all punishment for the crime is waived. This is mainly a ceremonial and symbolic power of the president. So for example, current President Donald Trump, he pardoned Susan B. Anthony. So that's kind of an example where, Susan B. Anthony is not alive, but it's an acknowledgement that their crime or their acknowledged crime wasn't one that should be, upheld in current times. And lastly, under the Constitution, the president is a federal official that is primarily responsible for relations of the United States with foreign nations. The president appoints ambassadors, ministers, and consuls, and again, subject to the confirmation by the Senate, and receives foreign ambassadors and other public officials. So again, the president is a representative of the United States. They're the ones who are basically having these talks with different foreign officials whenever we, have a president or a leader from another country come to our country to visit. They're the ones who receive them, who greet them. Whenever there is international conferences, so for example, any kind of summit surrounding climate change, the president is responsible to be there and represent our country. Next slide, please. Next slide. Did something happen? Oh. Should be slide 16. Yeah. Okay. Alrighty, thank you. So these are the candidates. So first we have Donald J. Trump, and he is the incumbent. So he has served for the last 4 years. It's okay, no worries. So he has been the incumbent serving in the presidency for the last 4 years. Next to his name, you'll see that there's an R that represents their party. So this candidate is a Republican. And then the challenger is what they're called whenever you're challenging an incumbent, is Joe Biden, and he's a Democrat. There are also other third-party candidates that are listed on the ballot as well. However, they do vary by state according to whether that candidate was able to file in time and was able to receive enough votes to get on the ballot. Next slide, please. Okay. So next we have the Vice President of the United States. So the Vice President actually has a lot of informal powers and performs a lot of the informal duties not prescribed by the Constitution. So they're the presiding officer over impeachment trials occurring in the United States Senate, although this is a role not required by the Constitution. And they also act as a presidential advisor and governing partner to the president. Mainly the role of the Vice President is a ceremonial one. Like I said, they're not prescribed by the Constitution any specific roles. They mostly do what the president is unable to do. However, one of the main things that they are responsible for is that if the president is unable to serve in their duties, whether it's sickness, whether the president passes away, the vice president is the next in line of succession to the presidency. Next slide, please. Okay, and so the candidates for this year, so the first is, or actually the incumbent first is Mike Pence, again, serving in the Republican Party. And the challenger is Kamala Harris under the Democratic Party. And again, there are other third-party candidates. However, this varies according to your state ballot and whether or not they were able to get enough votes to be on the ballot. Next slide. Okay. Marvin, could you remind me if I did this one?
Yeah, this was yours.
Okay, cool. So I'll keep going. So this is the United States House of Representatives or Congress member, depending on which word you want to use. Congress members refer to the House of Representatives in which every state has a different number of representatives who sit there. So members of Congress are responsible for representing the people in their district in the US Congress. Part of this responsibility is writing and voting on bills in the United States Congress. All bills must pass through Congress before they can get to the president to be signed into law. Congress also has multiple different powers as well. And actually in political science, the House of Representatives has a lot of power, and there's actually, you can go ahead and look up all these different things that they're responsible for, but here are just some. So they're responsible or have the power to declare war. They can raise and provide public money and oversees proper expenditure. So this is something that's actually in our news recently, if you check out what's going on. Impeach and try federal officers, again, something that has happened very recently. Approve presidential appointments, again, another thing coming up in conversation in Congress as well. Approve treaties negotiated by the executive branch. So like I mentioned, the president is responsible for negotiating foreign policy. Congress is responsible for ratifying any treaties that come out of that foreign policy. And lastly, they are responsible for oversight and investigations. Next slide, please. Oh, and I should mention that both Congress and state Senate, or I'm sorry, Congress is, their races varied by district, and districts lines are drawn very differently, which is why we wanted to promote the tool of Voters Edge and Ballotpedia so you can find out what your district is. So yeah, moving on, is this you, Marvin?
Yes, it's me.
Okay, great.
So the California State Senate is actually one part of a two-system state legislative branch. The candidates for state senate vary by district, so check the Ballotpedia sample ballot for your state senator candidate and their campaign information. These 40 state senators basically work alongside the governor of the California to create laws and establish a state budget. senators are able to do this by passing bills and resolutions, and bills are what proposes new laws or amend or repeal existing laws and can be introduced in either state assembly or Senate. They require a majority to pass in both houses and are then sent to the governor of California for their approval. Resolutions can be constitutional amendments, concurrent resolutions, joint resolutions, or individual House resolutions. And the most two important ones are constitutional amendments, which require 2/3 vote in each House and then go to public to be voted on in a primary or general election, and joint resolutions, which notify federal government of the opinion of the legislator on matters of public interest. And these are also what are used to ratify US amendments to the Constitution. So state senators basically have a lot of lawmaking power, and it's important to know who you're voting for. Next slide, please. So the California State Assembly is actually that second part of that two-system state legislative branch. And again, the candidates vary by district, so check your sample ballot on Ballotpedia or Voter's Edge for your candidates. And the State Assembly and State Senate have very similar responsibilities, the only difference really being the size of their districts. And the reason they both exist is to act as a check and balance to each other, with no bill being able to be approved without being approved in both houses. Next slide, please. So city council member is your representative on your city council for the district that you live in. And this position also varies by district, so check Ballotpedia for who your candidates are again. Their duties vary from city to city, and they sometimes have more responsibilities in some cities than in other cities, but their duties usually consist of reviewing and approving the annual budget, overseeing the performance of public employees, establishing tax rates, passing ordinances and resolutions, modifying the city's charter, regulating land usage, and regulating public health and safety, regulating businesses, and responding to constituent needs. People tend to overlook how much power city council actually has, but city council is saying a lot of things, such as establishing a police budget, which would go towards either funding or defunding the police, which is kind of a hot topic right now. Next slide, please. So the DA has, in different counties, cities, and towns, the DA is basically an elected attorney that prosecutes crimes against state and local ordinances. And again, the candidates once again vary by district. So check your sample ballot to find who your specific candidates are. They vary by city, sorry. So check your sample ballot on Voter's Edge or Ballotpedia. A DA is granted really wide discretion in determining whether to prosecute a lawbreaker and what charges to file and whether to grant a plea deal or not. And they're also responsible for gathering evidence and presenting evidence to a jury and judge for determination of a defendant's guilt. Not all DA candidates are the same. Some are tougher on crimes than others. So again, look up candidate information to see which one you most agree with.
Okay, so Superior Court judges. So these actually vary according to state and county, depending on how the Constitution is written in your state. Specifically speaking about California, the Superior Court judges are elected on a county-wide level. So what do they do? These are often the ones that we see on our ballot, and we're not exactly sure what they do. So Superior Court judges, they're the ones who preside over all criminal cases. So this includes felonies, misdemeanors, and traffic tickets, and as well as all civil cases. So this is family law, probation hearings, juvenile hearings as well. So crimes committed by people under the age of 17 to 18, depending on the case, and other civil cases. Superior Court judges serve 6-year terms, and they are elected by county voters on a nonpartisan ballot at a general election. And vacancies are filled by appointments by the governor. A Superior Court judge must have been an attorney admitted to practice law in California. So they need to have law practicing experience in order to become a judge and be put on the ballot. Excuse me. Or have served as a judge of a court of record in the state for at least 10 years immediately preceding election or appointment. So there are some background requirements to this position. So I just want to make a point really quick. So why does this matter? Well, judges, when they make a ruling, as judges do, they are essentially setting a precedent. And what does a precedent mean? Well, a precedent, not president, means setting a standard or setting a kind of like history for a certain case, right? And the president in a case has implications for how cases in the future will be ruled. So judges, when they make their ruling, they're making their rulings based on their interpretation of the law, right? And there's a lot of things that influence the way how a judge interprets the law. And one of those things are, you know, political ideology, experience, you know, different demographical differences of the judge as well. So as we're kind of seeing surrounding the conversation of the appointment of a Supreme Court justice, which is at a national level, how a judge interprets the law is according to their knowledge, again, political beliefs and judgments on other cases as well. So voting for a judge who best aligns with how you interpret the law and the way how you would like to see the law be interpreted, that's kind of like the way you kind of have to navigate these Superior Court judge races, because they're nonpartisan. So it won't be as easy as seeing their party registration or party affiliation next to their name. This requires doing a little bit more due diligence and kind of understanding what are the implications if X judge is elected. So yeah, next slide, please. Okay, so school district board of education. Okay, so this varies by city as well. If you are living in Los Angeles, you might be familiar with LAUSD. Maybe you were a student there as well. But these school board members are basically the people who run and oversee the daily operations of all public schools within their districts. So this includes K-12 public schools that fall underneath a school's district or a school board member's district. So for example, like I said, LAUSD. LAUSD is governed by a 7-member board of education, which appoints a superintendent. So that's someone who oversees the entire thing. They also run the daily operations of the district. And members on the board are elected directly by voters from separate districts that encompass communities that the LAUSD serves. So school board members will decide on different budget priorities. Their decisions affect how different school programs gain or lose funding. They're also the ones who decide on contracts with several entities who supply services to school. So these are things like food services, transportation services, as well as the police. So again, this is, it's a nonpartisan race as well. So it requires, again, doing your due diligence to really find the candidate that best aligns with your priorities for these K-12 schools. Next slide, please. Oh, and we're done. Alrighty. Someone want to take it away?
Well, thank you so much for that presentation, Marvin and Leslie. There was a lot of really good information in there, and I learned a lot. So now is the time. If anybody has any questions they want to submit to the Q&A feature, we could go ahead and try to answer those. I'll give it maybe a minute and see if anyone submits any questions. And in the meantime, I'm going to post all the resources I posted before, just in case anybody that came later did not get them. And while we're waiting, I'm going to go ahead and plug our event for State Senator Bob Hertzberg tomorrow. We are going to be hosting State Senator Bob Hertzberg over Zoom tomorrow at 12 o'clock from 12 to 1. And he's going to speak a little bit about his experience in state politics, about voter registration and why this election is so important. And he's even going to answer a few student submitted questions. So it's going to be a really amazing event, and I encourage you all to attend and let your friends know and everything. But does anybody have any questions for this particular event? I'll give it another minute. And I'm going to put the Bob Hertzberg information as well into the chat feature, just in case anybody wants to register for that. All right, I think we got one question. Let's go ahead and see. So it says any CSUN classes or local community organizations you would recommend to improve our understanding and skills in civic engagement / policy understanding.
I can answer that. So I currently have a minor in civic and community engagement. So if you're interested in taking classes focusing on that, I would highly recommend enrolling in the program. It's a really cool program. I'm currently in the program right now. And what it does, you take your first class, which is CCE 200, and that class actually teaches you everything about civic engagement, everything about community engagement, the different types, the different benefits, ways to get involved. So I would highly recommend looking into the program. It's a very small program, but yeah, I would recommend that if you're looking for classes to take it. And they also give you recommendations. Again, because it's a very small program, so they also give you recommendations for classes outside of that department that fall into the category of civic and community education. So not all of the classes will be under CCE, but they'll say, hey, there's a class in the Central American Studies or the Chicano Studies department that falls underneath or covers topics relating to civic and community engagement. So it's just a one-stop shop if you want to take those classes that are oriented in that.
All right, thank you for that, Leslie.
So I can actually ask something of that. So a local group that is kind of involved in the civic engagement and stuff like that is it's something I'm in called West Valley People's Alliance. So it's actually giving me the chance to talk to council members about defunding the police, you know, restructuring the police budget, and like trying to get rid of homelessness sweeps to kind of push more budget back into the community. Just general things like that. So the West Valley People's Alliance, that's what they're called. You can go on their website, and you know it's pretty easy to join and sign up. If you're looking to get involved, that's a good place to start.
And then also too, that reminds me, if I could just jump back in real quick, there's a really cool website called Volunteer Match. That is also a really cool website where you can find different ways to get involved in the community, and you simply just put in, you know, what kind of work that you want to do, your availability, any specific issues. So if you want to work in homelessness, the environmental issues, transportation issues, housing issues, they will connect you with a volunteer organization for you to get involved.
Thank you for all those resources, both of you. That's very helpful. I am not seeing any other questions as of now. I'm going to give it like 30 more seconds if anyone wants to submit any last minute questions you may have for our amazing presenters. But in the meantime, I just want to say thank you again, Leslie and Marvin, for taking the time out of your day to not only present this information, but to research it and do the heavy lifting for this event. We really appreciate it. Okay, I don't see any more questions. So with that, thank you again. And everyone remember to join us back tomorrow at 12 o'clock for our Bob Hertzberg event, and good luck voting, everyone.